Hey y'all, welcome to Geek Freaks. I am Frank, and today I'm joined by Mel Cartagena. Am I saying that right?
Cartagena, close
Oh,
enough.
Cartagena.
Cartagena,
Man, those last
but
names, they get
no
tricky.
worries. No, it is a little tricky. But thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening. We're bordering on evening over here on the East Coast, but
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk comics and just geek out with fellow comic book lovers.
Oh, I'm happy to. And you're the writer of a book called The Plot. Can you kind of break down what is the plot and give us a little quick synopsis?
Okay, yes. So the quick synopsis is it revolves. There's a character, a person named Corman, and he is sort of not exactly under arrest, but he is being questioned extensively by these people who resemble Men in Black.
Yeah.
You might even think of them as Men in Black.
Yeah.
And their interrogation is very roundabout, but it's very intense and relentless. Anybody who's ever been on that end of an interrogation knows what that feels like. So you experience that. And what happens is this interrogation is a leading to something that happens. And it's not that I don't want to say much. It's just, in a way, you have to experience the book itself. But let's just say the plot is a thriller that involves what I call the recycling the cultural debris around conspiracy theories. So I'm throwing Men in Black, I'm throwing sleeper agents, which it's been debunked, but I love the whole idea of someone who doesn't know that he's an agent, and
Yeah.
someone whispers a word, and then they suddenly go into like an agent mode, and so you'll see that in there. And I use the whole concept also of like using sleeper agents to take out certain candidates. Let's not go any further than that, but let's
Yeah.
say all these little elements that I call psychocultural debris make up the thriller that is the plot.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, you have 3 parts out so far. How many more parts are we expecting? Or yeah, it's got to be more to come. How many more do we have coming?
Okay, so well, it's funny, interesting. You hit on something. There is no more coming specifically about this adventure, but this is the comic book is sort of the gateway to a whole
I see.
concept called Flat Town, which is a place like a town, and it's a town that is modeled a little bit on the original X Files and that show from the early mid 2000s, Fringe, that show.
Yeah.
Like I am so like fascinated with this again, the psychocultural debris around culture around conspiracy theories that I'm taking all this stuff and I'm wrapping it, recycling it, and putting it into little thrillers that are going to be not just comic books. There will be comics in the future, but it's going to be web series. It's going to be other comics in short book form. There's going to be audio drama because I'm really not so much a cartoonist, but rather a writer who makes comics once in a while. Like I'm not
Right.
particularly driven to draw. But this comic came about because of lockdown happening. Like the lockdown
Yeah.
happens, and I look at this artwork that I have sitting around. I have a little bit of time because my job stopped working for about 3 or 4 months. I wasn't working, and I also started studying personal growth. I've been trying to make a go with comics for a couple of years now, and it's sort of not happening. And I'm like, okay, there's something in my head, something that I'm not dealing with, that I'm not addressing. So I start studying personal growth. I look at all these pages of artwork, and all of a sudden I realize, wait, I have a comic book here. I have an entire narrative. I thought I didn't have it before, but I take that and I start experimenting with like photocopies. I start doing posters with dialogue. It was
Yeah.
just artwork, literally pages with no dialogue. There was action, but no dialogue. It was a little bit of an experiment. I wanted to see if I could tell a story like Steranko did. You know that Steranko comic where the first 9 or 10 pages of a Nick Fury comic, there's no dialogue. It's just Nick Fury sneaking into a facility. I
I
don't know if
haven't
you ever
heard, I
seen that.
haven't read that, but I've seen it mimicked many times.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
It's
was doing
classic.
that too. I kind of mimicked
Yeah.
it with these pages, and then it kind of staled that. It staled that. It sort of stalled that. I meant to say stalled that. It felt like it wasn't really going anywhere, and I kind of put it aside. And I made a couple of short films, and so on. And then lockdown happens. Like a pandemic happens, peaks, and everything kind of stops for a little bit. I have this time, so I look at that again, and as I'm doing the personal growth thing, I realize I actually, I have an entire narrative here. Like I cannot see all of it, but I see something. So I start experimenting. I photocopy parts of it. I use it again and with different dialogue, and that alone changes the meaning of what you saw before. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute, there's something really cool here. There's something exciting. So I keep going, and like I have an entire narrative here. And then I started experimenting with software, stuff that I never done before, like Canva. I'm not affiliated with Canva, but it's a fantastic service. It's so
Mm.
cool. Like there's virtually no limits to what you can do with it. I explore that. I start just cutting and pasting, adding dialogue, and I'm like, I have a book here. Like I have an entire book. And there was that thrilling aspect of it too, in that this thing was there, but it was hidden. I couldn't see it until the way I thought about it changed. And I have an entire book. And that's an effect that's continued to build up to the present, where now I'm looking into doing audio dramas. I'm reaching out to people on Twitter, which is where I found you and I reached out to you. And so on. Like there's a web series. Because another thing that I'm doing lockdown that I happened was I started looking at web series, and I was like, wow, like I see people doing some really clever, inventive, funny stuff with just like their phones and like a few apps, some software. I'm like, this is really good. Like I didn't miss like going to the movies. I'm a movie guy, but I didn't really miss going to the movies. I was really enthralled by seeing all this stuff on YouTube. I'm like, okay, I want to try this because these people are doing this literally with just their phones, or like a camcorder, or like a what's it called, a DSLR. And I was like, wow. So that led to making the comic, but then building on that with the concept of Flattown, which I don't know if I sent you a link to a website. I will do that later. My apologies if I didn't do that, but I will send you that later on so you can share that with your listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're really building an entire world then. Much like X-Files, every time there was maybe like a rumor of a conspiracy in our world, they explored all the way. And you're kind of doing that here as well, right?
Yes, yeah, because I love the original. The remake, I'm not really into the remake. I feel like the same thing as with most remakes, like unnecessary. But I love the original in that they have an overarching narrative. They had the overarching narrative, but then there were little standalone episodes. But then they had a mythology, and I think I'm a big fan of that. I'm a fan of mythology because to me, you can take a narrative and by having mythology on it, it feels real. It gives it a sense of a past. It gives it a sense of a how would I say, that is lived in. It gives it authenticity. I guess it's fictional, but it gives it a sense of authenticity. And one of the people that introduced me to that is William Gibson. I don't know if you have never heard of him. He wrote Neuromancer.
Yeah.
And his short story Johnny Mnemonic was the basis for the movie Johnny Mnemonic, which in some ways there's some inspiration for that because I love cyberpunk. But cyberpunk is that. Cyberpunk is information that changes over time, or either increases in value or decreases in value over time. It's secrets, and it's edge. It's whatever's happening, whatever's cool and cutting edge, and we see that, like, if you spend any amount of time on Twitter, there's like subcultures that kind of hang out for a little bit and then they go away.
Yeah, or they evolve or devolve into something different, Yeah.
Something different. Yeah, exactly. It can keep going, or it could just completely flatline. It stops. Yeah. So, and I find that very fascinating. I love the platform. The platform is filled with a lot of white noise, but at the same time, there's people like you, people who are about sharing comics, about discussing it. So people like you, I look for, and I am leaning towards that. I lean into just how Twitter is like this novelty, this treasure trove of like awesome stuff, of ideas. Also, there's a lot of ideas. So I love to do that. I love to dig into that. And then also going back to what I said, like the overarching narrative, but standalone episodes and mythology. Another movie that a movie in particular that I love for that same reason is Escape from New York. And it's really on the basis of the one scene when Pliskin meets with Hawk, and they talk a little bit. They give a background on Snake, and he says, "You flew that Gulfire over Leningrad." It's a casual throwaway sentence, but at the same time, it's loaded with meaning. And like, well, what's a Gulfire? But again, you don't get a clear image, but you get a sense of like some kind of craft, which makes sense because what happens later, he's proposed, take this paraglider into New York, get the president out, you'll be full pardon. So I love stuff like that. And also the look of the movie, like everything is kind of futuristic, but at the same time kind of run down and gruff and crushed and all that. So I love that. I love the sense of a future that is like at once slick and modern, but at the same time kind of run down and gritty. So I tried to bring that, and hopefully I will continue to bring that into whatever I do next with Flattown, which is a concept. It's a place called Flattown, a town called Flattown.
Yeah. And so here with the plot, we have the same kind of questions like you bring up. Like there's this agency I want to know more about. There's the device. I won't say much, but the device that we know something about. All these questions are starting to be sparked, and they won't be answered right away. You have to, and maybe they don't need to be answered. And the fact that they're a mystery is why you're checking out Flattown, is because there are mysteries that are above you, and you only get peeks. What other kind of conspiracies or mysteries are you trying to open up in your world?
Okay, this is a very casual. Don't quote me on this because I may do it, I may not. But there was an episode of Joe Rogan that I watched a while back, and Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins was being interviewed, And he was getting into stories of back in the day when he was like on the media, like when he was one of the biggest, his band was one of the biggest bands on the planet, and getting into stories about stuff that we never heard about until now, that decades later he can get into that. But one thing that struck me about that interview is he talks about how some of the record contracts that you see, if you look at some of the clauses, it says essentially we own the music in this galaxy or any known galaxies. And I see something, I'm like, that is crazy. That means they already are accepting the idea that there may be alternate galaxies. And they're saying, well,
Yeah.
if there are alternate galaxies, we're getting that music first. We're getting the rights to that
Yeah.
music. So I was so like taken with that. And I'm like, okay, I am going to take that idea. I can't promise it's going to be good, but I'm going to do the best I can. I shot like a 8-minute short video of that with, well, not immediately, but leading into that idea. There is someone I'm reaching. Actually, maybe you can help me with that, or your audience can help me with that. I am looking for someone to do some visual effects, not deep, intensive visual effects,
Yeah.
complicated, something for like 2K resolution or less, because it's just, shot with GoPros, with phones. So it doesn't need to be crazy 6K, but someone who will be open to collaborating with me, please just have Frank get in touch with through Frank with me. So that, because I'm going to build that. That's the first of a series of webisodes, let's say, where I will expand a little bit on the questions that you brought up, the questions that were not answered in the plot. And I'll expand on that idea that was mentioned in a very casual fashion in Joe Rogan.
Yeah. So if we look back at the plot, where we are setting this world and like that, but so much of that world is built out through your visuals. Did you do all your own artwork for this?
I did, yeah, I did. I'm not really a good artist. I started doing it. I was really excited about doing it, but as I started getting into it, I found that I'm not really passionate about drawing. Like I can sort of kind of do it, but I don't have the patience of, say, like a manga artist. Like it is insane when you look at like say Junji Ito. Like he'll spend 8-9 hours on a single page, and like I can't do that. I'm more of like a rough sketch and kind of try to fake it with like by throwing black ink on everything else, on the mistakes, and make it very noirish. But I did do the artwork, and I will continue to do stuff in the near future. But I think what I do leans more towards graphic design, which is sort of like a meta page, like a page with just 2 or 3 things, and then like a little more diagrammatical than artistic, I guess. I don't really lean into that, but I'm like, well, the more I get into comics, especially independent comics, I find artists that are really like their artwork is not great, but their storytelling is so powerful that I'll give the art a pass. And just to throw a name there, Matt Kine. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but he is right up my alley. He is science fiction. There's a lot of spies, alternate realities, espionage. So I don't consider him a great artist, but I love his storytelling. Like the stories he says are so like wild and mind bending and original that I'm like, this guy, like he's like I'm like not worth. He's the man to me. So he's a good example of that.
And by definition, like a great artist is all about perception, and it's about conveying the emotion that's required here. And even with your panels here, you say you're not a very good artist, but you could tell you use pencil, of course, and then like some watercolor, right? Like black and white watercolor or smudging. Is that correct?
Okay, I used there's a pencil called Sketch and Wash. It's a pencil. It's like a fat lead pencil. You can use it dry, and it creates gray shading. But when you let's say you rub it on a drawing, and then you take a brush to it, it creates like you said, it creates like an ink wash effect. It creates a sort of an ink wash, and you can increase that. If you use a lot, then you get like a darker color. You can maybe use like a cloth or something to draw away, and it's a little lighter gray. So I used that. Because, it appealed to me. There was something exciting. There was a messy aspect, which I should mention. That's where Robopulp comes from. My Twitter handle is Robopulp, and that comes from Robopart comes from science fiction. It's probably my favorite genre because that's a genre where ideas are kind of the driving vehicle of the narrative. And pulp comes from Pulp Fiction, not so much a Tarantino, in the sense of the Tarantino word, but in the sense of like Pulp Fiction, the genre that was back in the 30s and 40s of the
used to be short stories in magazines that people would go
in
crazy
magazines
for.
In acid wash paper that doesn't age well. It's like crumply. Like I love that aspect of I love the roughness because a lot of these authors were being paid a penny a word. So they were literally writing all night and then running to the publisher to get their pay. Yeah. And there was no time to think about it. There was like a spontaneity that appeals to me.
And yet, when they would describe a room, they would go into such amazing detail because they got paid by that. So you'd go when you walk into a smoky bar, they would describe the taste of the smoke or every little detail because they were getting paid to do that. And it made these beautiful worlds that felt dirty because you almost felt it. It's really neat. It's good.
And it
good
goes
genre.
back again, ties into cyberpunk. And then also that's also where like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett and the Continental Op, those are the magazines where these characters were first seen. Like
Yeah.
the most obvious one is Black Mass, but then there was also Argosy, and then there were others. So that's where Robopop comes from. And then on top of that, there's an aesthetic of roughness. Like I personally don't like it when things look too clean and polished, because I feel that, not to offend artists, who do this, but I think it's very easy to do that. I feel like we're in a place where, like, with an iPhone, just from the phone, straight from the phone, the image quality is staggering. It's almost off-putting that it's so perfect and clean. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna add grain to that. I don't like that. That looks too clean. I'm gonna add scratch to that. Like I actually like to shoot with film also. Like I like to take photos on 35 millimeter because I like that kind of rough look of things. So that's where that comes from, the pulp, and that's the style that went into the making that. I like the idea of like taking the page, and I would take this thing called gesso, and very opaque gesso, very opaque white, cover the page after I did the pencils. And what that did is it's so opaque that it covered the pencils, like the original pencils, and it made the paper very toothy, very like a rough surface. So that when I ran the pencil over it again, it just ran through a pencil. Like I would go through pencil after pencil, doing each one page, because they would just eat up the lead. And then there was a very satisfying feeling of just like taking the brush and just seeing that those little ink marks come alive, like something that I didn't always know what was going to work, but that was part of the thrill of it. Like it was almost like a Polaroid, I guess. You take a picture of a Polaroid, you start shaking it, you're waiting. You're not really sure how it's going to come out. So that was one aspect of it that was made it such a thrill to do it. Just not knowing really how it was going to come out, not knowing even how the story was going to end a little bit. Like I knew a few pages ahead, but sometimes it would happen that I would reach a page and, oh man, I don't know what happens next. It's like I'm stuck for ideas. Like, what do? I would start going back over what I did before. Nothing. Oh, well, let me watch a show of the X-Files or one of your old shows. Nothing. Okay, let me watch the Parallax View, and let me watch all the President's Men. Like anything with a tone of paranoia. Let me watch anything like that to see if I can get ideas on what happens next. So it was a very thrilling process. I don't know how that would go towards a professional when you have deadlines and things like that.
No, now knowing how it ends, would you ever think of remastering it or trying to clean something up that you think, oh, now I know how this is going, I want to change something?
Not really, no. And I think that's where the whole concept of Flattown comes in. Like, I think of, like you said, like things that I would have done differently. I'm like, well, let me try that on the next thing I'm going to do. Or like, let me try that, carry that idea on this other media, on video and audio, like using audio and using video to tell stories, or using audio only, like for audio drama. So no, I don't think I would fix anything. I wouldn't remaster it, but I would take whatever I felt was underdeveloped there or I couldn't do there and try it in another media, like just to see how it goes, just to sort of give it a try again, give it a second chance. But no, I know that's a big thing nowadays with like a remastered comics too. Like for a while it was remastered movies, but remastered comics, I'm not that into that. Like, I am actually big into original artwork. Like did you see that when you went to Comic-Con? Like when you see these pages, I love to see that. I love to see like the whiteout. You see like how for a while they were republishing these pages in like the actual size 18 by 24.
Yeah.
And it was like a giant, like a coffee table oversized book. And I love to see that because like you said, there's whiteout. There's little like notes on the margins, and you can even see like
notes on the margins are the best.
Yeah.
It's like the artist is speaking to you outside of the actual story. So it's like, oh, of course I'm into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the initials or names, you can even see some of them are like Stan Lee or Steranko, like sending notes to each other. I'm like, that is like such a thrill to see that. How these guys were like, they were working, in a pulp fashion. They were working fast because they had deadlines, And when you look at that artwork, it's almost like discouraging too. It's like I'm never gonna be this good. Like it's so amazing. Like especially someone like Steranko. Like I love Steranko in the '60s. How he brought this sort of like a James Bond sophisticated feel to Nick Fury. Yeah. Like I love that Nick Fury. I'm not really into the new Nick Fury, but like it's such a thrill to see that, to see the rough pages, to see like notes, to see fixes, to see little things that were cut out and then with a piece of paper they pasted over that again. Like I love to see that. I'm like, I want them printed. I would actually pay however much for that. Like I don't really need to see it clean. And because of that, I'm not into modern comics very much because
Yeah.
they're so overproduced but underwritten and underdeveloped that I'm like, and this is just me. I'm not saying,
No.
all
Yeah.
comics. This is just how I feel about modern comics.
Well, and
I
that's where
actually,
the world of indie comics can thrive because you're getting people with their raw talent, raw emotion, and raw stories on a page.
yes.
You can't polish that too much, then you're Marvel, So that's why indie comics I think are on the rise. People are making their own work and sharing it, and people are eating it up.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I'm at now. Like I made the comic book, but going back to what I said about personal growth, I always wonder like why can I make things happen? Why can't I make things go? And 2019, before all that happened in 2020 and so on, I was I had a few short stories, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do something about this. The hell with it. I pay money to get a table at Boston Comic Con, which became Boston Fan Expo, and I go print out mini comics, short stories and little short essays that I've written and drawn. And I'm excited about that because man, I've never done this. I never worked the table. But to
Yeah.
me, that's always been like the rock star dream. When I go to Comic Cons and I see dudes on the table signing autographs, I'm like, that's like the rock star. Like I want to
Yeah.
be that guy.
Yeah.
That's always
Yeah.
been the thing with me. So I'm like, well, let's just do it. Like let's go and do it. So the weekend of Boston Fan Expo comes. I'm setting up the table. I'm excited. I'm so happy. And Friday comes, the whole night comes, and I didn't sell anything. I sold
Oh, shit.
nothing at all. And I'm like, well, it's okay, man. It's early. Like tomorrow will change. It'll be different tomorrow.
Yeah.
Saturday comes over, and the same thing. I mean, literally the entire day goes by. I sold nothing, like not one thing. And
Yeah.
I'm like, should I change the price? Should I do something different? Like, what should I do? And I'm like, well, it's okay. Tomorrow's Sunday. It could be different tomorrow. It'll be different crowd. Sunday comes, and literally the entire weekend, I sold nothing. Like nothing
Oh
happened.
man.
I was just crushed and devastated. That just completely sent me like back to the cave to lick my wounds. But
Yeah.
what that incident did after the pity party passed and all that, I realized that I didn't really handle that properly. I didn't really tell people that I was going there, and I realized that the reason why I didn't tell people is I was embarrassed to. Like I didn't really want to tell people. To quote Seth Godin, I didn't want to be on the hook. I didn't want to take responsibility for that. I didn't want to treat that like a serious event.
Yeah.
So as much as it hurt, it kind of got my head straight, and I realized I need to be more scientific about this. I think I need to start being more methodical about this. I need to start being like, say, someone like Jeff Smith, who was. I saw a documentary about him, about Bone, and how it became this massive success.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed by how that guy, he basically put a business plan together, went to a bank, got a loan
Yeah.
to start printing, and then just started selling. He went, by himself directly to the comic book distributors to sell. And I kind of started with that. I started studying that, and I found that too intimidating. And I was like, well, let me do something else. I'm aware now that there's this thing of web comics. There's people who
Yeah.
are doing phenomenal, literally not printing a comic book ever, just completely online. Okay, so let me look at that because based on what I spent for that weekend, I realized it's very costly. And if I were to print the book, like say the plot is almost 130 pages,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
that would be like quite an expensive book to print, let alone print a dozen copies, 20 copies, 30 copies. So, okay, let me study this. And from that led me to, okay, so these platforms have potential, Twitter, Instagram, and all that, but I don't know how to use them. And I realized, okay, there is a method to these platforms. There is a way to use these platforms that you can leverage that. So I started studying that, along with personal growth. I started doing the comic book. I started looking at videos by Seth Godin when he talks about like the smallest viable audience. So being more specific, like who is this for? Who are you making this for? And, put that on social media. And eventually you'll start connecting with other people. And that led to me, okay, so, this whole, doing searches, and I do searches and I see podcasters and I see, oh, wait, comic book podcasters. Let me reach out to some of these people, which eventually, leads to meeting you now, and I consider you a friend now because you're a friend of fandom. You're a friend of the
Of course.
comic book and you're a
Yeah.
friend of creativity. So it's changed my experience. And before that, I was almost considering leaving Twitter because there was so much noise and,
Oh, a lot of noise. Yeah.
yeah, and it's still there, but like I know
Yeah.
how to ignore it now. I understand that better. Just lean in on the things that you're using there, the resources
Yeah.
available, and just block out all the noise. Unfollow people. You follow anybody who's into that stuff, just unfollow them, block them, mute them,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of what led to that. That eventually, it's like a little road that started back then, and it's going, but it's picking up momentum, and that's very exciting. Like
Oh, of
that's really
course.
awesome now to be able to talk to people like you and to realize
Yeah.
how boundaries are now invisible. Boundaries don't really exist anymore.
Yeah. And you're setting up a whole world that people can start participating in early and see where it goes. It's exciting.
Yes, yeah, that's one thing that I'm going to explore, how to get people involved in that, how to make people participants. One way is like I was mentioning earlier, hopefully I can find collaborators through you and through
Yeah.
other podcasters, but I want to be able to actually make it almost like what would you like to see next? Like let's say I have this thing,
Yeah.
there's this idea. What do you think we should do with that? Like hopefully I can get fans involved. Once I have enough subscribers, I
Yeah.
can make it almost like a process. And there is an artist. Have you ever heard of Jason Shiga?
No, I have not.
He is how would I say? Like he is an independent creator. Like he's an independent, and he's in California. Also, I think he might be in Oakland, somewhere near Oakland. But he made a comic book with multiple choices, like almost like a
Yeah.
choose your own
Choose your
adventure
own
comic.
adventure. Yeah.
And that was really cool. Like he does really clever things like that, where almost like little mental puzzles, as he's also telling you a story. But if you go this way, it's almost like a Borges, I guess. You know how Borges has that short story about how because you chose this happened, but
Right.
then you chose this other thing. So he does the same thing with a comic book.
Hmm.
And they're also like cleverly written, but they're also kind of demented, kind of wild and weird.
Yeah.
And again, I love stuff like that. I like eccentricity. I love to see people just sort of putting their perversions and their naughtiness on comic books. Like I find that such a like a wild thing. Like say Wally Wood, for example. Like Wally Wood was a guy that he had to kind of rein in the perversion, the perviness because of the market for kids and all that. But
Yeah.
then he goes and makes John Cannon. Have you ever seen that comic book
Oh
Cannon?
yeah. Oh yeah.
And because that was made for like military bases for adults,
Yeah.
he lets fly. Like it's such a like
Yeah.
a demented, but at the same time like genius comic book where like you have like action, sex, and like
Yeah.
all in the same within like 3 or 4 panels. All this is
Yeah.
happening. I'm looking at that. I'm marveling at how he did this. I'm like,
It's so fast that you can't keep up with them. Like, wait,
yeah.
what just happened? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, I like it. Oh, okay, like this is the real Wally Wood. I'm like, I'm gonna study this. This is like the
Yeah.
real. He kind of pulled out all the stops on this.
Oh, yeah.
So I love to see that. And my I guess my eccentricity doesn't quite go that far, but I'm looking forward to see where it goes with Flat Town. And
Yeah.
keep exploring that. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start get people into Flat Town, head into the plot. Can you tell us where they can find you? We'll put it in the description as well. Your Twitter and all your social media places. Where can we get people going?
Okay, so I have a website called Welcome to Flat Town. It's all one word. Welcome to Flat Town. Flat Town with 2 T's. There is nothing there right now, but if in the near future, I expect to have stuff there. For now, the best place to reach me is Twitter. I'm very active there. My handle is @Robopulp. And the link to my comic book is there. And it's pay what you want or don't pay. But if you like the comic, I always ask, please share the link with one friend that you think would appreciate that. And if that friend likes it, please have him share the link, because this is about building my tribe. I'm gathering my tribe. I'm putting my people together. So that comic book is the gateway to Flat Town.
Building a community. That's where it's all at, especially with nowadays content creators. It's all about the community. And guys, this is a chance to get early in on one. I will say it's like 130 pages of comic book, very quick and easy read. You get sucked in and you go through it real fast. The artwork to me reminds me of like courtroom drawings, which is so good for the genre, right? I mean, it's perfect for this interrogation.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was really good. Last question I gotta ask you before we leave.
Yes.
How did you do the rain on those pages with the rain in the background?
Okay, I use a combination of like Dr. Martin's whiteout, which is the little tub of like a white paint, opaque white paint. I use that for like close-ups where like the rain is thick.
Yeah.
For the background where the rain is thinner, I use that little whiteout pen, like you've seen Jim Lee use that sometimes on his Twitch.
No way.
I use that. And then for the ground, I use like a spatter. I use the same thing. I use Doc Martens with a little more water and just kind of flicking it or just flicking the brush like that, which was so much fun to do.
It's so cool. Yeah. For someone who doesn't care about the art was so freaking neat. I mean, it was so amazing. So that's
thank you so much, man. It's interesting. No one's ever made that description of a courtroom sketches, but I actually like courtroom sketches. I like that sort of immediacy, like it's something done fairly quick.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, there's a mix of like the noir is there. I mean, noir is definitely there. The pulp is definitely kind of there, but the courtroom, like you got to go quick. You have to capture the face and move to the next thing. You definitely get that in this. So you guys check it out, guys. The comic is called The Plot. This is Mel, and we're going to be linking off to everything in the description. So go follow them. Follow on Twitter, follow everything. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining me today, man.
Thank you so much. I hope I can come back again in the near future with something new. I had a great time. I
Yeah, let us
appreciate
know for
the
sure.
little time window to just
Yeah,
vent on the awesomeness of everything that we have around us now.
that's what it's all about. All right, guys, we'll see you guys next week. Take it easy. Bye.